Morning!
Madden!
Welcome to the India Explained podcast, recorded in London and San Francisco. One take, unscripted, no rehearsal.
Hey Bunty, how are you this Sunday? Well, how are things in London?
It's everything's good. Everything's good, Rohit. All tip top. We are. It's yesterday. I went did a bit of retail therapy. I bought some shoes for myself, which is always an expedition. And what else? It was a very peaceful weekend, just at home. Cooking. Went for a Japanese meal today, which was really nice. How are things with you?
Oh, excellent! Like very good. And maybe some point of time we should do a piece on consumption habits in India in the 80s. I think often about this notion of having more than two pairs of shoes or three pairs of shoes. Because the kind of paradigm in the India of the 80s was you always had, your school shoes and then you had this spare pair of white canvas shoes and about one set of sneakers, which Gola was a company or...
Yes.
so, but anyway,
Murjani jeans.
Murjani jeans, yeah, killer jeans, Murjani jeans, or tailored jeans. Now things have turned around where in India, the manufactured sort of Levi's were the pinnacle of status, and now bespoke or tailored jeans in the US have that same status. But anyway, I'm still digressing wildly. Things are like very good here. I thought, this is no segue whatsoever, but I just thought that nothing to do with jeans or shoes or consumption. We should just, talk, as maybe we are compelled to, about, everything that's been going on with Padmavat now, right? They dropped the I. So, long story short, we know about the controversy involving Padmavati. We did a piece on it. The film's producers and director Sanjay Leela Bhalsadi dropped the I, but the Karni Sena, that right-wing organization, vigilante organization, in the name of Rajput honor, has continued its violence. So I'm just like wondering, what your thoughts are on that.
I think this is a disturbing one because, first of all, this is a fictional account of a historical event. That is something that, by and large, everybody's got agreement on. It's a film, right? It's a work of fiction. Nobody's trying to say that this is exactly. Sanjay Leela Bhansali wasn't there taking notes as events unfolded. He's putting across a story. And I just think it's appalling how public culture is kind of imploding in India, where if somebody says that, I'm going to tell you a story, and this story will have bits that you may not find entirely to your liking, it suddenly is cause for, burning down movie theaters, stone pelting. The last thing that I read on it was, a bunch of school kids were being stone pelted as they were trying to return home. And then on the follow through of that story, other things happen. So that's my first observation. What's your take on how things are unfolding on this one?
I don't even know, what is the dominant analytic angle to take on this, because first the pretext has been the dishonoring of a Rajput queen, Padmavati. But Padmavati never existed. This is based on, a poem called Epic Poem by Malik Muhammad Jaisi, a poet who was a Muslim. And the anger of the Karni Sena has been that, there's a character in it, Alauddin Khilji, who's shown as lusting after Padmavati. So, in some ways, it's been disrespectful so there's a communal angle to it completely, right? The idea that Rajput honor has been desecrated. That's one. The bizarre thing is, so that's a work of fiction to begin with. This is another fictional rendition. The absolute bizarre thing is that the film itself actually valorizes Rajput honor in the most regressive and patriarchal way. Now, of course, regardless of its regressive patriarchal politics, it has to be and must be defended, as indeed it has. I mean, freedom of expression applies to works of poor quality as well. So there's that thing. But then they didn't even watch the film before they engaged in this kind of chaos. The violence has been mindless. Modi has said nothing. The excuse that's always used by a central government person is that it's a state law and order thing. The Congress said nothing. Again, there's an election probably on the horizon. And Rahul Gandhi made some, tepid remark on Twitter. So what does one make of all of this? It's just absurd from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think probably the broader point that we can make, looking at it outside in, is that I'm trying to think when periodically in India, when there is a movie or a book that people disagree with, or certain sections of the citizenry disagree with, there is hangama, and that hangama is basically confined to a bit of sloganeering, petition writing in the course of civil. There's a civil framework to it. I've begun to notice that in the last 2 years, how you go about engaging with the civic matter is becoming very uncivil, right? So I had never heard of anything called the Karni Sena, right? All of a sudden, it seems like a bunch of, I don't know whether these guys were off behind it. They were at one point saying that people, Kshatriyas who work in the army, should refuse to eat in the mess in kind of a parallel because they have been dishonored by this film. I mean, how bizarre is the kind of social imagination of these people? I don't know who the Karni Sena are. Do you know who these guys are?
I had no idea about them. I mean, I'm not the greatest authority on Indian politics, especially at the state, local level. I try to keep up as much as I can, but these senas, they kind of emerge overnight, and it's supposed to be some organization that was formed for protecting the honor of Rajputs. But these kind of organizations, they absolutely have to have some tacit political support, right?
Right.
Now, I'm going to share two other tangential thoughts. Or not tangential, maybe. One is that a number of right-wing people who live in Gurgaon. Okay, so all of this stuff is happening in Rajasthan, and now then there's Gurgaon called Gurugram, again, part of some, the whole sort of absurd Hindu nationalist rebranding of Indian public space. So in Gurugram, they attacked this school bus. There's a number of people with actually right-wing sympathies on Twitter who have expressed outrage.
Right.
And, what commentators have said is that, as long as Muslims and Dalits are being lynched, everything was fine. When middle-class Hindus with Hindu nationalist sympathies, when their children come under threat potentially, then suddenly these guys become thugs, right? That's one. The second thing is, the absurd controversies. The writer Madhu Kishwar, and I did a kind of satirical piece for this, she has, put out a lie naming 5 Muslims as responsible for the violence against the school bus and the children, and the police in Gurugram had to actually clarify that that was not the case. So the Hindu nationalist mindset, whenever there's something of this kind, it's a conspiracy, it's actually Congress people and so on. So again, it's just the whole thing just seems like one bad episode after another into some kind of absurd nightmare that you might the kind of satire that used to be generated about Soviet Russia or now about North Korea.
I think you raise a very interesting point from a propaganda standpoint, how information is being used. Initially, the true test of a successful propaganda was creating credibility and believability, right? But what has happened, particularly in elections in Europe, in North America, and particularly some of the things that the politicians or this lady is using in her playbook, is it's very interesting. Given that there is social media, given that everybody follows their own channel, and there is no authoritative voice, as it were. So there isn't a Doordarshan News at 8 anymore. We don't live in that age. Everybody's able to plug into a narrative of their own, not a fact. A set of facts. The facts remain the same, the narrative changes. And what I think is rather propaganda now has become where it's good propaganda is not about building credibility, but building disbelief and incredulity. So if something happens, it's a playbook maneuver rather than say, I'm going to deny that happened. They can't do that because clearly that event has happened. It's been widely reported. So then what the playbook allows you to do is discredit, right? Saying that, what happened was not to our making of variables that we didn't control or the actual people who are to blame for it as somebody else. So I see the fingerprints of, when Donald Trump in your neck of the woods calls out crooked Hillary at every occasion when there's a scrutiny up against him, I think that there is some kind of familiarity in how that kind of public discourse logic is being deployed in what this lady is doing. Maybe she's not that sophisticated. She's clumsily trying to do something which she's seen practiced elsewhere. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with you. And this kind of goes to the heart of, some of the things I'm exploring in one of my books very significantly, and to an extent in the second one that I'm writing, more so in the one on Hindu nationalism and new media, which is that, there's part of a wider culture of misinformation. And yesterday I happened to be at a very interesting talk at Santa Clara where the professor, she looks at, misinformation, rumors in times of crisis, and she talks about something called disinformation. And
Right.
she says the purpose of disinformation is to confuse rather than, to lie outright. And to me, what's happening in the right-wing space is there's disinformation along the lines this Professor Kate Starbird described it. But then there's this whole bunch of other people who really buy into this kind of paranoia. And, that is eerily similar to what's happening in the American case, which is, what this talk showed was that there was a bunch of these extra ultra right-wing websites which were totally fringe. And then what happened is that, for years, the kinds of things they'd been saying these extreme things, birther conspiracies in the US about Obama being a Kenyan, stuff about genetically modified crops, anti-vaccine stuff. Suddenly, at some point of time, all of this stuff becomes mainstream. And I think you will find a strong parallel in the Indian case where, there's a bunch of people who actually believe this stuff and it gets mainstream. So in some ways, these people are actually the useful idiots for the BJP and the right, which is that they, really believe there is a secular, Vatican-run conspiracy. And then, I'm sure the people in the BJP are smart enough to know that this stuff is nonsense, but they realize that they can strategically use this complete nonsense that others believe on the internet, and they can use it for propaganda or disinformation for their benefit.
I think you've made a great set of points there, quite a lot of things to unbundle. But before we do that, and maybe we need to pick that up, how information works, how disinformation works in a separate episode, perhaps across a range of different issues. Let's cut back to Padmavat, formerly titled Padmavati. One of the things that is becoming very interesting is the film has been released in the UK, so I'm going to go and see it. I think we should ask all the people who are our listeners to make every effort to try, if they're interested in this kind of a story, to go and see it and make up their own minds. Because I think one of the things that is happening, which is the most distressing thing, there may be certain aspects of how history, faith, etc. have been kind of represented, which you may find offensive to you. But at the moment, I get the sense that most people are acting on the orchestration of people who themselves haven't seen the movie, know the story, and are reacting to basically a rendition of fiction, right? So this is how bizarre it is, which is you're basically hurling rocks at school kids because of your understanding of a fictional piece of work, which you haven't, in all probability, seen. Right, that's how bizarre the stacking up is. So my first cure to this would be, or the first response would be, first go and see it. Right. Now this will make Sanjay Leela Bhansali very rich. Right. That is a separate point. It already has. Okay. So maybe the other
30-40 crores per day, something like that. In that 25 to 35 crores first one day each day. Amazing collections.
Okay. So then there's another bit of me which says that is this and very, again, in the disinformation age, is this a very elaborate PR exercise gone wrong, right? And I'm hoping it's not. But okay, stepping back to what I was saying initially, let's all watch the movie, compare notes, and if it's... I still struggle to see how you can pole vault from a work of fiction to stoning a school bus. The dots just don't join up. It doesn't matter what your political affiliations are, and then for people to imply that again was done by the other side is really odd. So that's where I'm resting on this. Let's watch it, make up our own minds, and if we genuinely feel that it's something that needs fixing, then probably we can come back to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's I'm torn about whether or not to watch it, because I absolutely defend Sanjay Leela Bhansali's right for the film to be shown. I agree that everything that's happened around it has been absurd. But, it's supposed to be visually sumptuous from what I can tell. But again, its politics are, profoundly, profoundly regressive. Now, Shekhar Gupta, who edits the print, made a remark, or is one well-known journalist, that, it's put liberals in a bind because, it stands for regressive values and they are forced to defend it. It's not put anyone in any kind of bind. I mean, it's an open and shut issue that you fight for any work to be expressed, beyond sort of very extreme works, which even a society like the US has very clear lines about. So at the same time, I'm not sure that I want to give my money to Sanjay Leela Bhansali or not. But, so that is where I would leave it. So I'd be inclined not to watch it, but, let's just let people watch it if they want to. I mean, it's their democratic right.
Okay, I'll take a final segue on this, Rohit. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but I recently watched The Darkest Hour, which was Winston Churchill, and without being a spoiler, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but the pivotal moment in the movie is that Winston Churchill is, in the first few days of his premiership, he is very uncertain about whether he can do what needs to be done to stand up to this evil man called Hitler. And there is a scene where he pivots and says that, I'm going to do this, and, the world needs to stand up, etc. Have you seen the movie as yet?
No, I haven't. And again, I have, like for me, Churchill is in many ways, how much worse than Hitler was he from the perspective?
Correct. So what the point that I'm trying to make is, in public culture here, there's a reverence for Churchill, and the reverence for Churchill, whether Churchill is right or wrong is another story. So there's a movie that is a fictionalized account of the early days of Winston Churchill, and some of the bits of that fictionalized account is actually uncomfortable. It shows Churchill as a very frail, indecisive person. No school kids have been stoned. No movie theaters have been burnt, and and this is just as I'm trying to draw parallels as to how people are responding to essentially a rendition of a historical story. So it'll be interesting. So I don't know. I don't want to urge you to watch Padmavat, but if you want to see The Darkest Hour, and I check out Padmavat, and we can compare notes.
Yeah. I think we should. Okay, maybe, if I can get to see it, or excerpts from it at least. And, while on riots, I'll just share one other thought, that this week riots broke out and nobody died, I think, but there were some minor injuries. They broke out in a French supermarket which heavily discounted Nutella.
I saw that.
That for me is civilized country. That, if Nutella ke liye ladna hai, to lado, boss. But, what is all this Padmavat and all?
Yeah, we should. Anyway, chalo, take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to us. Rohit and Bunty would like to sign off. Please stay tuned. Follow us on India Explained on Twitter. Keep listening. Thank you for all your support.